Under the influence of players such as Kasparov, and Shirov, Polgar and many others, the King's Indian defence has become the most popular method of meeting 1d4. Instead of stodging around with some turgid Queen's Gambit or Queen's Indian, Black immediately gives notice that he's striving for the initiative, for the attack. When facing the King's Indian, it's very important not to back down. It's vital to fight fire with fire, otherwise you'll just get trampled on. The system that I'm recommending against the King's Indian has become known as the Bayonet Attack. As the name suggests, this is one of the most direct methods of meeting the King's Indian. This is an opening for the brave and fearless. The Bayonet Attack was originally popularized by the Soviet grandmaster Mark Taimanov in the early 1960s, but in the 70s and 80s it fell out of favour. I'm not quite sure why actually. But a couple of years ago, the young Dutch player Luc van Welly started playing the variation again with excellent results. And since then, some of the world's most aggressive grandmasters have started playing the Bayonet Attack as well. For instance, Tony Miles, Johan Hjartarson from Iceland and Eric Lobron from West Germany. So we're in good company when you play the variation. We arrive at the starting point of the Bayonet Attack by these moves. 1d4, knight f6, knight f3, g6. Obviously these moves can be played in different order. c4, bishop g7, knight c3, black castles, e4, d6, bishop e2, e5, white castles, knight c6, d5, knight e7, and now the move b4. This is the Bayonet Attack. The point of b4 is to begin play on the queenside immediately. White wants to play c5, followed by taking on d6, so that the pawn on d6 is weakened and the c-file is open. In this line you keep the knight on f3. We'll see the importance of that later on. Normally white plays the knight back to either d2 or e1, intending to bolster the centre with f3. In order to explain why I'm recommending b4, it'll be helpful to see the kind of counterplay black normally generates in the main line of the King's Indian. Typical is Miles' Saxe. White plays knight e1. Remember, I'm recommending b4 instead of this move. Black plays knight d7, bishop d2, f5, rook c1, that's to prepare c5, knight f6, f3, white's pawn on e4 needed some support. Now black plays f4. Black is now trying to play g5 and g4 very quickly in order to open up the g-file. And white is going to try to play c5 and open up the c-file. Now, I like white's play here. White has an excellent space advantage with this pawn on d5. And very often in this main line of the King's Indian, white actually crashes through on the queen side, sometimes even takes a rook. But black doesn't care at all. Black is just playing for the attack, he's playing for mate. Let's see just how fast black's attack can be. White plays knight d3, black g5, c5, knight g6, c takes d6, c takes d6, knight b5, now that threatens to come in on c7, so black plays rook f7, white plays queen c2, threatening knight c7 again, so knight e8, a4, h5, now that's preparing g4, knight f2, that's stopping g4 again, bishop f8. Now it looks very passive that, but actually black is preparing, well we'll see in a moment. h3, again stop g4. Now, rook g7, coming to the g-file. Knight takes a7. Well this looks like a free pawn, because of course if black takes the knight then queen takes c8. So instead, black moves the bishop. And the knight comes back to b5. So black has lost a pawn, but really it doesn't matter at all. He just continues with the attack. Queen to b3, king h8, a5. Now black crashes through with g4. It's a very strong move. F takes g4, h takes g4, h takes g4, and now black just plays the knight back to f6 and is ready to recapture the pawn on g4. Knight c7. Now instead of moving the rook on a8, black simply captures on g4 and continues the attack. If white does now capture on a8, then black moves the knight into e3. If white takes, rook takes g2 check, king moves, queen g5, and mate is unstoppable. This is a really typical variation in the King's Indian. So Miles was forced to exchange pieces. Bishop takes g4, bishop takes g4, knight takes g4, and rook takes g4. Now there's a threat to the g-pawn on g2, so he must play rook f2. And now Sachs brings his queen into the attack. Again, white cannot take the rook on a8 because black simply crashes through on g2. So Miles had to play queen h3, defending the pawn on g2. Rook g3, queen h1, that's a miserable position for the queen. And now he moves the rook to c8. Bishop e1, bishop h6. Well, it's quite clear that black has assumed the initiative. He's ready to swing the other rook across to g8 to join in the attack on g2. And, well, white cannot be said to have any kind of attack at all. This queen on h1 looks completely ridiculous. a6. B takes a6, rook c6. Rook g8, rook takes d6. Now f3, that's been hanging in the air for some moves. Rook takes a6. Well, I mean, this is just fiddling while Rome burns. I don't suppose white had any defence at this stage anyway, but this is just typical of the kind of attack that black can get. And now Sachs finishes off in a very neat way. Queen e3 check, bishop f2, rook takes g2 check. If the king moves to f1, then queen e2 is mate. So Miles took the rook on g2. F takes g2. Now, of course, if white takes the queen on e3, then bishop takes e3 check, and that's the end. King h2, and now Sachs gets the queen, and mate will follow shortly. Obviously that's not all forced, but I have a very uneasy feeling about these positions from white's point of view. I don't like it that the game is reduced to a race where my king on g1 is just a target for black's attack down the g-file. Whether or not black's play is completely sound is not the point. He's having all the fun in these kind of positions. Instead of wasting time moving the knight on f3 backwards, I think it's much better to initiate play on the queenside straight away before black has a chance to get going himself. That's why I like the idea of playing b4 immediately, trying to play c5. Now, c5 is definitely the break I want to play, because after I capture on d6, I open the c file, and also it means that the d6 pawn is rather weak now. So how should black react to this slightly unusual but very direct and logical move? In 99% of all games, black usually continues with his idea of punting the f-pawn up the board. Now to do this he's got to move his knight away, either to e8, to d7, or most critically to h5. I'll consider all these moves as well as the rarer idea of a5. The first move I'd like to look at is knight e8. Now black is pretending that nothing is happening that's any different, and white is continuing just as in the main line, but you'll see that white is in fact streets ahead with his queenside attack compared to the first game we looked at, Miles Sachs. So, knight e8, white plays c5 straight away, black plays h6. Now the reason he's done that is before he plays f5, he's worried about white's knight coming into g5. Now immediately you see the reason why I've left that knight on f3. We'll be looking at this idea of white playing knight g5 a little bit later on. So after 10 h6, white plays knight to d2. Now that the pawn has moved to c5, he can manoeuvre this knight round straight away to the aggressive square c4. f5, knight c4, knight f6. Now white wants to strengthen his centre now, strengthen the e-pawn with f3. Black plays f4. Now this is exactly the same kind of attack that black is playing here as in that Miles Sachs game. But white continues a4, g5, bishop a3, knight g6, b5. Now you can see there's a threat of white taking that pawn on d6 with pawn takes pawn, and then knight takes d6. So black must play knight e8, defending the d pawn. Now white plays a5, black plays rook f7, and now this is a very fine move indeed. White plays b6. That's, as in true Nimzovician fashion, attacking the base of the pawn chain. So white has a very strong threat here of playing pawn on b6 takes pawn on c7. And if queen takes, for instance, then simply pawn takes d6 and you've won a pawn. So black must react in some way. So, for instance, a takes b6, a takes b6. So the easiest way of defending against this threat is now for black to take on c5, d takes c5. So bishop takes c5. Now the rooks are meeting each other, so rook on a8 takes rook on a1, queen takes a1. Now black takes the pawn on b6, and white, well, could take with the bishop, but let's just say, for the sake of argument, knight takes b6. Now let's have a look at this position in a little detail. You'll see that black is a million miles away from getting anywhere with his kingside attack. He's not ready to play g4 at all. Normally, in this main line, black has the rook on g7, and that's obviously very dangerous. But here is a long way from that. And white has opened a great many lines on the queen side. His queen is coming down to a8, that's very dangerous indeed. And also white is ready to chop off, at the right moment, chop off this bishop on c8, which is one of black's most dangerous attacking pieces. The other thing I want to look at is the difference between the two pawn structures. Now black's pawns, this isolated pawn on b7 will potentially be very weak indeed, and also the pawn on e5 as well later on. But the most annoying thing from black's point of view is that he doesn't have any pawns protecting his king any longer. Now in the long term this could be fatal, whereas white's king is perfectly safe. And of course, if we look at white's pawn structure, there's not a weakness there. The base of the pawn chain, g2, really can't be attacked for the moment. And of course, the most beautiful thing about white's structure is that protected passed pawn on d5.
This is Grandmaster Damian Lemos here for onlinechesslessons.net. First of all, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you would like to receive more free chess videos from us, you can just click the subscribe button below. I would also highly recommend signing up for my free mail course, the 10 Grandmaster Secrets to Dominate Chess. During this exclusive course from onlinechesslessons.net, I'll share with you my own Grandmaster shortcuts to effective attacking, defending, and growth hacks to improving your chess without complicated books or memorization. So sign up by clicking the sidebar on the right, and I know you won't be disappointed. Once more, this is Damien for onlinechesslessons.net, and I'll see you in my videos. Thank you.